over the first time I started riding about a year and 8 months ago, where I really actually started riding a motorcycle versus, I think the most I'd ever done is got on a three-wheeler, and I ended up breaking the oil pan, and that was years back. I jumped it, hit a rock, broke it, couldn't start it back up. And then I got on a street cruiser one time, took it down the block. It was raining, slid it on sand. I was always pretty strong, so I didn't dump it over. It came very close, but it slid on wet sand. I took it back and I never rode again. You know, the concept of listening to people about how dangerous motorcycles are, I listened to that quite a bit, and then after my little experiences, I was like, oh, I didn't want to ride motorcycles really. I just wanted to run around and do other things. But that being said, one of the biggest things for me was when I first took my beginner's course, I had bought a V-Star 650. I think it had 40 horsepower, and I did some mods to it, not anything major, short shots, things like that. It might have had 42 to 45 horses at best. But being a bigger rider at 230, I think top speed was 98. Well, I left the parking garage when I bought it from this guy and his wife, and I signed up for a beginner course. I went down to my beginner course because they provided a 250cc. They had various different types, so I took one that was closer to my V-Star cruiser style. So anyway, when I started off with that, it was pretty scary actually. You know, I hadn't ridden. I was intimidated by the bike, and one of the first things they had us do was, like, they had us basically have both feet down, and we were using the clutch, and we were doing the friction zone. I didn't really understand it at that point, but we were using the friction zone to duck walk the bike back and forth. And that kind of got me a little comfortable with it because I was pretty intimidated by it. Even the 250 seemed to have a lot of power. And when I was doing that, you know, I went there with the intent of learning. And that's what I did. I took the course as a 2-day course. So the first day I felt pretty decent. I was getting a little bit more, how do I say, confident in what I was doing. So that confidence built up a little bit. So the next day we went out and we were practicing emergency stops. You know, I wasn't able to use the 1 foot down or any of that yet. I'd go down, we'd start off in first gear, go all the way down, get to about 15 miles an hour, and then I would brake using all four, basically the stomp method. So all fours, both hands, both feet going down, coming to a stop, and it was a progression of braking. It wasn't anything that was supposed to be abrupt. It was progressive. So as I went on, I finished the course. I got on my V-Star 650. So a few of the YouTube videos that I watched, where I think helped me tremendously. I watched some of these guys. One, don't travel outside of basically the area that I lived. So I started off real slow, driving around there a few times. I'd park, start going out, kept doing that, then started venturing a little further out each day. Not much, but finally where I was able to ride around my neighborhood confidently, braking, practicing the things I'd learned in my beginner course. And eventually I got to the point, I want to say about a month or two, where I went out on the street, went around the block, came back, rode around in my subdivision, again, constantly practicing, and I would come to this lot here. and I got permission to practice here as long as I wasn't burning out or doing anything crazy, which I'm not, and I haven't, and I've always kept my word on that. And the church people here let me practice, so I come here since it's close to the house as well. And when I started getting a little more comfortable, I started going out a little further. Then I ventured out finally back over to the course where I had taken my first beginner course, and I did that course. I went in, I set some cones up for myself, and I would carry a backpack with cones, and I would set cones up in here too and practice here. And I would practice every ride, and I still do for the most part. Once in a while I'll practice things out while I'm riding, but for about, I want to say about a year, I rode my V-Star consistently, and to the point where I was finally going out, ventured off into the freeway, just short runs at first, short runs, like from one exit to the next, and then I would come back around and do it again. And I finally got to the point where I took an intermediate course and another 2-day course, went through that course, practiced everything they taught me there, and then I went through the Champ U online course, which was also a great course. It was teaching me about trail braking, different things like that, and I'd heard about it, so I would practice that on curves. Any curve that I took, it was small or whatever, I would practice that slow, brake very 5%, and start releasing as the bike started leaning. And I started getting good with it. And then I started taking my V-Star out to the twisties. There's a place out here, and I started practicing that. Practicing and practicing. Now to the point where I bought this FZ1 leader bike, and again I took it out, took it to a lot, practiced over there at the programmed lot, and practiced until I got very comfortable with it. Now I'm very super comfortable with the bike, but I also still watch the different things, inputs that I do. And then now that I've become very accustomed to this bike and the speed and everything, it's progression. It's just a matter of progression, days and days, and investing that time and proficiency, and it's constantly learning, constantly watching the different things that I do and when I practice and what I'm still doing wrong, that kind of thing. And coursework is important. I'll never say it's not. The purpose of this is how confident a rider becomes over time, and do we tend to start forgetting the respect factor for the bike? Like after you start getting super fast, I'm talking, you hit 60, 70, 80, 90 relatively smoothly, not afraid, everything's going good, to the point where you're weaving in and out, just weaving back and forth, not out of traffic, because I really try not to do that. Passing cars, passing other trucks, big trucks, that kind of thing. Does a rider lose the respect that they initially had for riding when they first start riding? And I would venture to say the answer is both yes and no, depending on the person, obviously. But I think for me, I've always had respect for the bike and the power of these vehicles. I mean, they're just amazing, the things that we can do on them, and the things they're capable of doing, and how quickly they'll just get from 0 to 60. And some guys will hit 140, 180, 200 miles an hour on straight runs with nobody around, or people in there too. But I think at that point it's a matter of having respect for the bike and what it can do, and knowing what the person can do. But I think at that point we start losing respect for the things that the bike can actually hit. Like, for instance, I was riding around and I hit a weight, and just the weight threw the tire out. It was just crazy. It's probably about a 3-ounce weight, fishing weight, but it amazes me, just the little stuff that can derail a bike so quickly. But keeping the respect has to be an individual thing, and understanding the skill level that the person has, and being able to maneuver the bike, but also handle the bike in an instance of a fright. For instance, when you hit something like that, no matter, I don't know, for me, even being a intermediate decent rider, I wouldn't say I'm a great rider because there's a lot to learn still, but I'm a decent rider, and even that will kind of jolt when I hit that weight. It was kind of like, hey, but keeping composure and being able to maintain that composure is what's very important. And how do you gain that composure? How do you start to gain that? Well, for me, it's been practicing on lots like this, and constantly practicing on these lots. So it's always something, even if I'm turning my wheel and I'm coming around, and then I'm using my front brake to stop and straighten the wheel out. And if it just isn't straight enough, sometimes just that little bit will kind of get that bike to kind of want to drop. So things like that, or hitting a rock while I'm practicing U-turns and figure eights and things like that. So yeah, those kinds of things prepare a person for that kind of jolt. But I mean, I think if you're going 100, 120, 140, 180, I mean, the jolt is, composure's everything. I just can't see if a person grips the steering real hard to try to keep the bike maintained. I mean, you have to practice being loose and relaxed constantly. But yeah, I think in the year, 8 months that I've been riding, I've gotten super comfortable, so I can take a lot of curves and things like that going pretty quick, and it's comfortable to me. It's not frightening. It's not where I can't handle it because of the trail braking, because of the different aspects of the 5% rule, radius equals miles per hour, that kind of thing. And then positioning on bikes, you have to drag knee or all that, but if you want to, that's up to you. I'm not really one to say, oh, what's that guy doing? I mean, it may look ridiculous at first, but if you practice it for fun, and maybe if you plan on track riding, then it's not that big of a deal. You just practice, and I practice out on the streets too, with weaves, manholes. I see a manhole, I may want to go left, I may want to go right. Practice counter steering, maybe pushing and pulling. So if I want to go left, I'll pull it in, go right, same thing, push right, pull left, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think that as we progress as riders, for me in my journey, it's been where I have become confident, but try not to lose the respect, because the cars out there, the people driving these cars, as most of you know, they could care less if they hit you, honestly. Some people do, obviously. For the most part, I should say, the majority do care, but there are those people that they just don't care, man. They're not paying attention to big cars, they're not paying attention to little motorcycles. And that is up to us to be prepared, to be vigilant, to constantly be on the defensive, and know how to be offensive as well. So it's not just being a defensive driver, but it's also being an offensive driver, setting yourself up to be able to have options versus constantly being on the defense where you're dodging bullets. You have to also know how to be offensive and set yourself up so that when you see something coming, you're capable of getting out of the way and quickly and doing it in the way that you know how to do it, but also practicing and constantly practicing. I mean, coming to the parking lots, places like this, and practicing emergency braking, practicing U-turns, practicing tight turns, practicing from a standing still point right here so that you can take a U-turn from right here and turn your bike facing that way. That kind of thing from both left and right sides. So, I don't know, I guess each rider can pinpoint what they feel in their journey of riding, how they've become proficient and how they feel on the street, and have they lost the respect for these motorcycles that have so much power, so much capability. And I hear constantly people say, oh, nobody's ever going to be able to pull the capabilities of a motorcycle. And maybe that's true on the streets, but how much capability can you get, and what can you do to constantly grow as a rider? So, that being said, let me know what you think. Let me know your thoughts, and we'll go from there. All right.